What is going on, everybody? Cryo here. Today we are looking at how I personally like to tank Sanguine Depths during Shadowlands' first season of Mythic Plus with the Prideful affix. Before we begin, I invite you to take a look at my pull-by-pull mechanics video first. There you can see exactly what each mob of every pack does in greater detail. This video is more about the pulls and route itself, with a few tips and tricks thrown in. This has been the most heavily requested dungeon, and I figured I've kept you guys waiting long enough, so let's get it. Friendly reminder, these route imports are available for everyone's use and you can find them on my website, link to that down below. This dungeon does have some leeway to change up routes from week to week, however, I like to break it down into two categories. You are either running tyrannical or fortified, and you're either skipping trash or not. I say this because this dungeon is one of the more difficult ones during tyrannical weeks, and ideally you want to have prideful spawns for each of the bosses. This is 100% doable, but you must utilize some sort of invisible mechanic such as shroud, potion, etc. When it comes to fortified, prideful is less impactful and not necessarily needed for the bosses, so you can get away with not skipping trash and spawning prides in more random locations. Whichever route you do decide to take, make sure you change the weekly selector on the right hand side of the MDT add-on to display certain things such as inspiring. There will not be a 1.1, 1.2, and so on for this dungeon. First things first, as a Blood DK, you can use these little critters here at the beginning to build up some bone shield before the key starts. Now this first pull is most likely always a double pull. Some crazy kids pull the Mist Dancer as well, but I find that in pugs, it's more trouble than it's worth. Not only do you need to have the mobility to grab all three packs, but you also need the mobility to get back to the lantern without dying, and even on a Vengeance Demon Hunter, this can be cutting it close. If you have a Venthyr, great. If not, no big deal. As you can see here, Guardian Spirit is the real MVP, allowing me to activate the lantern while still getting punched in the face. Now throughout this hallway, ticks will be flying in, and you also have to deal with the animated weapon spawns. These can be tricky to grab aggro from, but do your best to keep them off your friends. When dealing with the Mist Dancer, I do my best to aim it down the left side of the hallway and tell my group members to be on the right side. This way, people are less likely to accidentally get cleaved by the frontal. It's always a good idea to focus down targets that are not susceptible to CC abilities, especially on weeks like Necrotic. For this part, voice is ideal, but if not, find a way to have a ranged player grab the neutral grubby dirt cruncher. This will even out our percent later on in the dungeon, and it doesn't add too much stress on the group. If another player cannot do this job, you can always grab it yourself. Just be mindful of the patrolling brute. Skip this room entirely, no need for invis potions or shrouds. These packs can be deceivingly rough. Do your best to stop as many engorged casts as possible. Fun fact, the famished ticks on the side need to be pulled as soon as you can. This helps prevent them from flying under the ground and bugging out, pun intended. If it does get stuck, it will eventually become unstuck, but only after you pull the first boss. The final pack before Crixus needs to be handled with some caution. This is a prideful pack, so even cleaving will be required towards the end. The best way to deal with this is to whittle down the brute, even cleave the ticks, and then kill off the brute. On tyrannical weeks, it is imperative nobody die during this prideful. Arguably one of the most important prideful spawns in this dungeon. You will want to have maximum uptime with the buff when facing the boss. Bloodlust on the pull and begin chipping away. On tyrannical weeks, it is never a good idea to miss a Juggernaut rush. On that note, if you are not speaking in voice and you are pugging, do not try to immune soak until the 3rd or 4th cast. You can easily get somebody killed, and this is not good. A wipe on this boss after using Prideful and Lust usually means a dead key. Depending on your key's level, there are essentially 2 ways of dealing with the Severing Smash mechanic. One way is to have all mobile players run as far away as possible. You can max range the smash, and this will cause you not to spawn an orb. The second way is to just brute force it using a mix of healing cooldowns and personals. As you can see here, our ranged players start to take off early, while the healer and I back up just far enough so that the orbs do not spawn directly under the boss. It's also a good idea to let the healer pop them, since they are the ones healing up the split damage. But you must pop all orbs before the next Juggernaut rush. Once the boss is in execute range, you may not need to pop any more orbs and can simply kite him. Just be ready in case your party can't quite finish the job. Congratulations, if you've made it this far, you just might time this key. Interrupts here. Kick as many things as you can. Most importantly is the Curse of Suppression, but you also do not want to be ramping up rack soul stacks. If you are opting into the skip route, do not forget to snag these little guys. Never be in front of this sentinel. I try to keep an eye out on my melee friends as they like to wiggle around and might get caught by the cleave. Fun fact, if you are a mobile class, you can dodge the slice altogether. Do keep in mind that the sentinel will turn with you, so if you leap or roll away, do not do so in the direction of your melee friends. Ranged players should stay at a max distance to avoid dread binding chains altogether. Melee and tanks just be ready to break them. While fighting this pack, be sure to move a little bit down the hallway. This will trigger the RP and cause the second Overseer pack to move into position early. I always LOS this pull. That way there is no chance of accidentally pulling the patrolling sentinel or the bat that occasionally flies by. After this pack is where the invis skip occurs. Be sure to mention it to your group ahead of time as a simple reminder to not use any other potions or engineering tinkers. Once you reach the gate, do not click it. This will pull the next pack and can get spicy if not everyone is ready. You can sit in this alcove and not pull anything if you need to regroup. This hallway can get out of control very quickly. Keep an eye on the patrolling mobs and sentinels. You want to pull enough as to not waste the Prideful buff, but do not get overenthusiastic and pull too much. Something to keep an eye out for, Vestige of Doubt. If at all possible, try to stun or grip each Growing Mistrust cast. This is what causes the red pools to spawn on the ground. If you cannot get them all, which is more likely in a Pug scenario, tank them as close to the edges as possible. As for the Remnants of Fury, interrupt their explosive anger cast. So what happened here? The patrolling mobs were too close to the furthest scribe when I pulled them. This is obviously not ideal, but mistakes happen, and the most important thing to do is keep composure. For us, focusing down the explosives, interrupting when we can, and keeping the sentinel away from party members was all we could do. Fortunately for us, we were able to whittle some down and the Venthyr Lantern was ramping up, giving us our damage and healing increase, but I would not recommend trying this again. Frenzied Ghouls. Run away from these even on tyrannical weeks. Even after the nerfs, these mobs still slap awfully hard, but they spawn our Prideful, so we put up with them. You should have Lust and Prideful for this boss, especially on tyrannical weeks. What really makes this boss a breeze is having players that can negate the castigation cast. Hunters with Feigned Death, rogues can vanish, etc. Other than that, nuke the ad down ASAP. The pulsating damage is still a bit much, so dealing with it as soon as you can makes your healers swoon. Dodging the rotating spheres should go without saying, as this is an easy way to rack up damage intake. Once the boss is dead, the real decisions begin. You have to decide if you want to spawn a Prideful before or after the third boss. On tyrannical weeks, I always suggest spawning it before, but to each their own. If you want to spawn a Prideful for the third boss, you need to get to 75% trash count. If not, make sure you have at least 69%, and this will ensure that you spawn a Prideful before the Gauntlet and not at an awkward time during it. Again, play smart here. While pulling, there is a second patrol wandering around and you do not want to accidentally pull them. Do everything you can to keep the scribes close and kite out the frenzied ghouls. Communication helps a lot here. For us, we opted to spawn the Prideful for the third boss, so you will see us continue to pull until we reach that sweet 75% trash count. Once downstairs, depending on the affixes, you can pull all the casters together or split them up. Just be sure to interrupt and stun when you can. Also, keep in mind that this is a prideful pull, so mind your mana. Now, I still feel like this boss is a bit overtuned, but planning ahead can help you avoid some common issues. As a tank, your big priority is iron spikes. I always coordinate with my healer between personals and externals to stay alive. This communication lets my healer focus on upcoming group-wide damage instead of worrying about me. As a Blood DK, it's all about timing your death strikes. As for the rest of the group, Right of Supremacy can be negated by picking up spheres, however sometimes you have terrible spawns or are already falling behind on heals. This is why it's a good idea to call out when you will be using personals, such as immunities. This also allows your fellow teammates to gather more orbs to soften the blow. Now, Endless Torment is another ability that tricks many groups that I see. This is not only a constant pulsating AoE on the group, but your healer also cannot stand still during its duration, making it that much harder to heal. So again, planning ahead and using personals is the way to go. The biggest tip I can give for this boss is to not overlap too often. If your healer is using a large cooldown, don't use a personal, and vice versa. If you are opting to spawn Prideful for the start, you should not need anything major for the first 60 seconds of the fight. Pump out as much damage as you can and save as many CDs for the end. However, this does not mean just sit on something like a health stone or a potion if you are about to die. Use your cooldowns, just use them wisely. Tanks, it is typically your job to grab the essence of Zerali, which is a good thing. The next 2 packs can deal some deadly damage, and there is no rule against using the shield. It still reduces your damage, and we love DRs. Now I'm going to tell myself that we tried this pull for the sake of this video. We intentionally pulled everything just to die to show you guys that a full team wipe does not equal a dead key, as long as it's after the first boss. So yeah, 10 out of 10, don't recommend doing that. Pulling the first pack outside is much safer and gives your group much more room to work with. Avoid stepping on traps, interrupt, and you'll be fine. The second pack is a bit more deadly. You can choose to fight 2 out of the 3 or all 3 together. Now what I mean by that is if you taunt either one on the end, it will only pull the taunted mob and the Mist Dancer. In case you miss that, you can opt into fighting the Mist Dancer and the Overseer alone, or the Mist Dancer and the Sentinel alone. We just pull all 3 here, hard focusing down the Overseer first. If I am running with a coordinated group, I like to pull the first pack of the Gauntlet back into this room. It prevents the dogs from continuously spawning and gives a brief breather before starting the actual fun part. Now, you do not need a hunter per se, but you will need to tell your party what you are planning ahead of time. If you are a new tank or a squishy tank, I suggest kiting the cadets until they start dying off. Their damage is increased when they are with their homies, which can be quite deadly if you're not expecting it. Threat will be a major issue during the Gauntlet for sure. Do everything you can to keep it, but if you have DPS blasting away and then kiting the mobs away from you, that's really not your fault. If you are using the benefits of a Venthyr, the dogs that spawn do count towards the lantern buff, so if you are close to 10 stacks, it may be wise to wait for another spawn before moving on. Now, since we spawned Prideful for the third boss, we are required to invis past the Sentinel pack to avoid spawning our last Prideful too soon. As you can see here, our healer needed to use a mana pot during the Gauntlet, which is why you see us waiting on the other side just to regular res. This is totally viable. Congratulations, you've made it to the end of the dungeon with a comfortable amount of time to spare. Nothing too crazy going on in this room, avoid traps on the ground, and whatever weekly affix is going on. As mentioned before, this will spawn our last Prideful just in time for the final boss. I do not have too many tips for this boss other than dodge as much as you can. Wicked Rush can be moved out of, and if you are quick enough, you will negate the bleed entirely. This is a tremendous help for your healer. Piercing Blur is rather obvious, along with dropping the Shining Radiance for Gloom Squall. Since my group was all ranged, I decided to drop the Radiance in the middle of the platform. This makes it less of a hassle for them to move, and I don't really need to hit the boss. Rinse and repeat, and have fun. That's all I have for this guide. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and hopefully you learned something new to take back to your group that will make your next Mythic Plus experience a good one. If you are enjoying this content, please do me a huge solid and hit that share button, leave a like, and comment down below what aspect of these videos helps you out the most. Again, you can get my imports for MDT on my website, link for that down below. Also, feel free to join my Discord if you have any specific questions or just want to hang out with some like-minded people. I'm out of here, folks, but as always, stay frosty.